Running Wolf had lived alone for 3 summers now. The Apache warrior chose solitude after his brother died in battle against the cavalry soldiers. He built his camp far from the main village, high in the Rocky Mountains where eagles nested and wind sang through the pine trees. At 28 winters old, Running Wolf was considered late to take a wife. His mother had died when he was young, and his father fell in the same battle as his brother. The tribal elders often reminded him that a warrior needed a woman to make his lodge complete. They spoke of children who would carry on his bloodline and help him in his old age. But Running Wolf felt different. The deaths of his family had made his heart heavy like stone. He preferred hunting alone, speaking only to his horse and sleeping under stars without hearing another person breathe nearby. His lodge felt peaceful in its emptiness. The other Apache warriors his age had wives and children now. They would visit his mountain camp sometimes, bringing news from the village below. They talked about their women with proud voices, describing how their wives cooked good food, made strong clothing, and bore healthy babies. "You cannot live like a hermit forever," his cousin Blackhawk told him one day. "The spirits want Apache men to create new life, not hide in the mountains like wounded animals." Running Wolf listened but said nothing. His heart felt frozen, unable to imagine sharing his space with another person. The thought of a woman moving through his quiet lodge, changing his careful routines, seemed impossible to accept. Yet lately, something had begun stirring in his chest. During long winter nights, he sometimes felt a strange emptiness that hunting and solitude could not fill. He would wake from dreams of hearing soft laughter or gentle singing, only to find his lodge silent and cold. The tribal medicine man, Gray Feather, visited him as spring arrived. The old man sat by Running Wolf's fire and spoke about the natural order of things. "Even the wolves mate and raise cubs," Gray Feather said, his weathered hands warming over the flames. "The mountains you love so much are full of life, creating more life. Trees drop seeds, birds build nests, deer bear fawns. You fight against nature itself." Running Wolf stirred the fire with a stick, watching sparks fly into the darkness. "My heart feels dead inside." "How can a dead man take a wife?" Gray Feather studied him with wise, dark eyes. "Perhaps you need to find a woman who understands sorrow, someone who knows what it means to lose everything dear." The medicine man's words planted a seed in Running Wolf's mind. Maybe he could find a young woman who had never known love or loss, someone pure and untouched by grief. A virgin bride who could learn to live his quiet way without bringing painful memories or complicated emotions into his simple life. As weeks passed, this idea grew stronger. He began thinking about riding to distant Apache bands looking for a suitable young woman. He imagined finding someone gentle and silent, who would move through his lodge like morning mist, barely disturbing his peaceful existence. His cousin Blackhawk encouraged this plan when Running Wolf finally spoke of it. "There are many unmarried daughters among the Mescalero Apache to the south," Blackhawk said. "Their fathers would welcome a strong warrior like you. You have good horses, fine weapons, and hunting skills that would make any family proud to call you son-in-law." Running Wolf began preparing for this journey. He selected his best horses and gathered gifts suitable for winning a father's approval. Buffalo robes, silver ornaments taken from Mexican traders, and his finest arrows decorated with eagle feathers. But as he made these preparations, strange dreams began visiting him at night. He saw a woman weeping by a river, her long black hair covering her face like a dark waterfall. In these dreams, he felt pulled toward her sorrow, wanting to comfort her tears, though he could never see her features clearly. Gray Feather visited again before Running Wolf's planned departure. The old medicine man seemed troubled, staring into the fire with distant eyes. "I have been speaking with the spirits about your journey," Gray Feather said slowly. "They show me symbols I do not fully understand. A storm coming from the south. A woman dressed in white who is not what she appears to be. And you, standing at a crossroads between your old life and something entirely different." Running Wolf felt uneasy but tried to dismiss the medicine man's words. He had made his decision and gathered his traveling supplies. Tomorrow he would ride south toward the Mescalero villages, seeking a virgin bride who could share his quiet life without disturbing his carefully built walls of solitude. That night, as he lay on his sleeping robes preparing for the journey ahead, Running Wolf heard wind beginning to rise in the mountains around his camp. It carried strange sounds, almost like distant crying or the voices of spirits calling across vast spaces. He pulled his blanket higher and tried to sleep, unaware that tomorrow's journey would lead him not to the simple, peaceful marriage he envisioned, but toward a meeting that would shake the very foundations of his solitary existence and teach him that some storms cannot be avoided, only embraced. Running Wolf rode south for 2 days, following ancient trails through canyon lands painted red by morning sun. His pack horse carried gifts wrapped in buffalo hide, and his war paint remained carefully stored for the formal meetings he expected with potential fathers-in-law. The weather grew strange as he traveled deeper into mescalero territory. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, though the season was wrong for heavy storms. The air felt thick and restless, making his horses nervous and skittish. On the afternoon of his second day, Running Wolf came upon an unexpected sight. A small camp sat beside a clear stream, but something about it seemed wrong. No smoke rose from any fire. No dogs ran out to bark warnings. The single lodge stood silent as death. His warrior instincts made him approach carefully, bow ready and eyes scanning for signs of danger. But as he drew closer, he heard a sound that made his blood turn cold. The high, keening wail of a woman in deepest mourning. The voice rose and fell like wind through canyon walls, filled with such raw grief that Running Wolf's own buried sorrow began stirring in his chest. He had heard many mourning songs during his lifetime, but this one carried something different. This was the sound of a soul being torn apart. He dismounted near the stream and called out in the Apache language, "I am Running Wolf of the Chiricahua band. I come in peace and mean no harm." The mourning song stopped abruptly. After several moments, a woman emerged from the lodge. Running Wolf's breath caught in his throat. She was not the young virgin he had imagined finding. This woman had perhaps 25 winters, with a face marked by both beauty and terrible sadness. Her long black hair hung loose and tangled in the traditional way of mourning. She wore a white doeskin dress, but it was torn and stained with ashes. Most striking were her eyes, dark as midnight but filled with such pain that Running Wolf felt his heart crack just looking into them. She stared at him with the hollow gaze of someone who had looked death in the face and lost everything that mattered. "You should not be here," she said, her voice rough from crying. "This place carries bad medicine. The spirits of the dead walk here." Running Wolf found himself stepping closer instead of backing away. Something about her grief called to the buried sorrow in his own heart. "What happened here? Where are your people?" The woman's composure crumbled. Fresh tears streamed down her cheeks as she sank to her knees beside the stream. "They are all dead. My husband, my children, my parents, my brothers. The spotted sickness came through our band like wildfire. I alone survived." She spoke of smallpox, the white man's disease that had devastated many native tribes. Her entire family group, nearly 30 people, had died within days of each other. She had spent weeks digging graves with her own hands, singing death songs until her voice nearly died. "My name was Singing Bird," she whispered, "but that woman died with her children. Now I am nothing. I wait here for the spirits to take me too, but they refuse my pleas." Running Wolf felt something breaking open inside his chest. The careful walls he had built around his heart began cracking like ice in spring thaw. Her pain was so much greater than his own, yet he recognized the same hopeless emptiness that had driven him to the mountains. Without thinking, he knelt beside her at the stream's edge. "I know the taste of loss," he said quietly. "I lost my brother and father in the same battle. My mother died when I was young. Grief has been my only companion for 3 summers. She looked at him with surprise, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Then you understand why I cannot leave this place. They died here. If I go, I abandon their spirits forever. The dead travel with us in our hearts," Running Wolf said, repeating words Greyfeather had once told him. "Distance cannot separate us from those we love." As they talked by the water, the strange weather began worsening. Wind picked up, bending trees and stirring dust into small whirlwinds. The dark clouds moved closer, and Running Wolf could smell rain approaching. The woman who had been Singing Bird looked at the changing sky with fear. "The storm comes early," she said. "It has been building for days, waiting. I think the spirits are angry because I still live." Running Wolf studied the approaching weather with growing concern. This was not a natural storm. The clouds moved in patterns he had never seen, swirling like a great wheel in the sky. Lightning flickered inside them but made no sound. "We should take shelter," he said, but she shook her head. I will not hide from death anymore. If the storm spirits want me, let them take me here beside my family's graves." She stood and walked toward a small hill where wooden grave markers stood like silent sentinels. Running Wolf watched her go, feeling torn between his desire to flee this place of death and sorrow, and something deeper pulling him to stay. The wind grew stronger, whipping her torn white dress around her like ghost cloth. She raised her arms to the darkening sky and began singing again. Not a mourning song this time, but a death chant calling the spirits to claim her. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops began falling. Running Wolf realized he faced a choice that would change everything. He could mount his horse and ride away, leaving this broken woman to whatever fate awaited her. He could continue south seeking his virgin bride and simple life, or he could stay and face the storm that was building not just in the sky above, but in both their wounded hearts. As lightning split the darkness and rain began falling harder, Running Wolf made his decision. He secured his horses and ran toward the hill where she stood challenging the storm, ready to face whatever tempest was coming, in the sky and in their lives. Rain struck like arrows from the darkening sky as Running Wolf reached the burial hill. The woman stood among the grave markers with her arms raised, her voice rising above the wind as she sang her death song. Water streamed down her face, mixing tears with raindrops. "Come down from there!" Running Wolf shouted over the growing storm. "This is madness!" She turned to face him, her dark eyes blazing with desperate determination. "Go away, warrior! This is not your death to die. Save yourself while you can." Lightning exploded across the sky so close that Running Wolf felt the air crackle around them. The thunder that followed shook the ground beneath their feet. He had never experienced a storm like this. It felt alive, angry, supernatural. Instead of retreating, he climbed the hill toward her. "If you mean to die here, you will not die alone." His words seemed to break through her trance. She stared at him in shock as he approached through the driving rain. "Why would you do this? You do not even know me." "I know sorrow," he replied, having to shout now as wind howled around them. "I know what it feels like to want the pain to end, but I also know that dying solves nothing." Another lightning bolt struck nearby, so close that it left them both temporarily blinded. When Running Wolf's vision cleared, he saw the woman had fallen to her knees among the graves. Her death song had become desperate sobbing. He reached her and knelt beside her, not caring that mud and rain soaked through his clothes. "What was your husband's name?" he asked gently. She looked at him with confusion through her tears. "Strong Eagle." "Why do you ask?" "And your children?" Little Fox was 4 summers. Bright Star had just begun walking. Her voice broke completely. "They died in my arms. I could do nothing to save them." Running Wolf took her muddy hands in his. Strong Eagle would not want his wife to die alone on a hill in the storm. Your children would not want their mother to abandon the life they can no longer live. The wind seemed to pause, as if the storm itself was listening to his words. In that moment of relative quiet, she whispered, "How can I live when they cannot? How can I find joy when theirs was stolen?" "You do not live for joy," Running Wolf said, thinking of his own 3 years of isolation. "You live because life itself is sacred. You live because their love still exists in your heart, and when you die, that love dies with you." She studied his face in the strange greenish light of the storm. "You speak like a man who has wrestled with these same spirits." "Every day for 3 summers, he admitted. "I chose isolation instead of death, but perhaps isolation is just another way of dying slowly." The storm began raging again with renewed fury. Hail started falling, small stones of ice that stung their skin and threatened to drive them to the ground. They could no longer stay exposed on the hill. "The lodge!" Running Wolf shouted, pointing toward her camp below. "We must take shelter." This time she did not resist. They stumbled down the hill together, leaning against each other as wind tried to knock them over. The hail grew larger, some stones big as robin's eggs pounding the earth around them. They reached her lodge just as the worst of the hail began. Running Wolf quickly secured the entrance flap behind them, but even inside, the noise was tremendous. The hide walls shook and strained against their wooden framework. In the dim interior, Lit only by occasional lightning flashes, they sat catching their breath. Both were soaked and shivering. The woman, she had not yet told him what she called herself now, wrapped herself in a dry buffalo robe and offered another to Running Wolf. "I have not spoken my new name aloud," she said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "When Singing Bird died with her family, I became Walks Alone. It seemed fitting for a woman with no people." Running Wolf nodded, understanding. "I have been called Running Wolf since my vision quest, but some days I feel I should be called Speaks to No One." Despite their desperate situation, she almost smiled at that. Two people with names that speak of solitude, thrown together by the worst storm I have ever seen. The wind outside had become a continuous roar. Through gaps in the hide walls, they could see debris flying past. Branches, pieces of other lodges, even what looked like entire trees. This was no ordinary weather. My grandmother told stories of storms like this, Walks Alone said, pulling the robe tighter around herself. She said they came when the spirit world was trying to teach people important lessons. When someone needed to learn something they had been resisting. Running Wolf considered this as he listened to the tempest raging around them. What lesson could require such violence? "Perhaps that some things cannot be faced alone," she suggested softly. They sat in companionable silence for a time, both lost in their own thoughts. Running Wolf found himself studying her face in the brief moments when lightning illuminated the lodge interior. Even marked by grief and hardship, she possessed a deep beauty. Not the fresh, unmarked beauty he had expected to find in a virgin bride, but something richer and more complex. Her suffering had carved lines of character around her eyes and mouth. Her hands, when he had held them on the hill, were calloused from hard work and rough from digging graves. She was not the simple, peaceful wife he had imagined, but something entirely different. The storm showed no signs of weakening. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger. The lodge poles groaned under the wind's assault, and Running Wolf began to worry they might not survive the night in this fragile shelter. "Is there a cave nearby?" he asked. "Somewhere stronger than this lodge?" Walks Alone shook her head. "Only the graves of my family. And somehow I do not think the storm spirits would respect even that sacred ground tonight." As if summoned by her words, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the earth. One of the lodge poles snapped with a sound like breaking bones. The hide wall on that side began flapping wildly, letting in sheets of rain. Running Wolf grabbed his saddle blanket and tried to reinforce the damaged wall, but the wind was too strong. Water poured in, quickly turning the floor into mud. "The lodge will not hold much longer," he said grimly. Walks Alone looked around her failing shelter, the last physical connection to her dead family, and Running Wolf saw her make a decision that seemed to cost her greatly. "Then we leave," she said simply. "We face the storm together and whatever it means to teach us." They gathered what they could carry in the darkness. Running Wolf's weapons, some dried food, and a watertight parfleche container Walks Alone used for her most precious belongings. The lodge was collapsing around them, hide walls whipping like angry spirits in the wind. "My horses," Running Wolf remembered suddenly, and pushed back outside into the storm. He found his animals huddled together near the stream, terrified but alive. The pack horse had broken free and scattered some of his carefully prepared gifts across the muddy ground, but both horses were unharmed. He gathered their lead ropes knowing they would need the animals to survive. When he returned, Walks Alone was kneeling beside the collapsed lodge, her hands pressed to the wet earth. She was speaking in the old Apache language, words he could barely hear over the storm but recognized as a farewell prayer. "I release you to the spirit world," she said to her dead family. "I will carry your love with me, but I cannot die with you today." Standing up, she looked at Running Wolf with new determination in her dark eyes. "Where can we go in this storm?" Running Wolf tried to remember the landscape he had traveled through. There was a box canyon about a mile upstream. High walls, good shelter from wind, but we will have to cross the stream to reach it. The stream that had been peaceful yesterday was now a raging torrent. Muddy water rushed past, carrying broken trees and debris. It looked deadly, but staying here meant certain death as more trees crashed down around them. "We go together," Walks Alone said, taking his outstretched hand. Leading the horses, they waded into the violent water. It was deeper than Running Wolf had expected, reaching their waists in the center. The current tried to sweep them downstream, but they held tight to each other and to the horses' lead ropes. Halfway across, a large branch came tumbling toward them in the current. Running Wolf pulled Walks Alone against him, shielding her with his body as the debris crashed into them. The impact knocked him underwater briefly, but her strong grip kept him anchored. They emerged on the far side, gasping and exhausted, but alive. The horses scrambled up the bank, their fear giving them strength to climb the slippery slope. Finding the box canyon in the storm proved nearly impossible. Lightning provided brief glimpses of the landscape, but everything looked different in the driving rain. They stumbled through brush and over rocks, following what Running Wolf hoped was the right direction. Then, when they were both nearly ready to collapse from exhaustion, they saw it, a narrow opening between towering rock walls. The entrance was almost hidden, but once inside, the wind's fury became muted to a manageable roar. The canyon was deeper than Running Wolf had remembered, with several side chambers carved by ancient waters. They found a small cave about 20 feet up the north wall, accessible by a narrow ledge. It was dry inside, with evidence that other travelers had used it before. Old fire rings and smoke-blackened walls. Getting the horses up to the cave was impossible, so Running Wolf secured them in an alcove below where they would be protected from the worst of the wind. He carried up their supplies while Walks Alone gathered dry wood from deeper in the cave. Soon they had a small fire burning, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. For the first time since the storm began, they could talk without shouting. "You saved my life tonight," Walks Alone said, wringing water from her long hair. 3 times over on the hill at the stream crossing and by knowing of this place. Running Wolf was removing his wet shirt, laying it near the fire to dry. "You saved mine as well. I was drowning in my own sorrow even before I met you. At least your grief was honest and clean. Mine had turned bitter and selfish." She looked at him with surprise. "How can grief be selfish?" "Because I used it as an excuse to abandon my people, my duties, my place in the world. I told myself I was mourning my family, but really I was just afraid of being hurt again." The fire crackled between them as they sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the storm continued its violent dance, but here they were, safe and warm. Running Wolf found himself really looking at Walks Alone for the first time. Her white dress was ruined, stained with mud and torn in several places. But as it dried by the fire, he could see it had been beautiful once. Intricate beadwork along the sleeves and hem. Quill work patterns that spoke of skilled hands and loving care. "Your wedding dress?" he asked gently. She nodded, touching the beadwork with careful fingers. "My mother and sisters worked on it for 2 full seasons. Strong Eagle said I looked like moonlight on water when I wore it to our marriage ceremony." Her voice caught slightly. "I put it on when I decided to call the storm spirits. I wanted to meet my family in the close of my happiest day." Running Wolf felt his heart squeeze with compassion. "It is still beautiful. As are you." She looked up at him with startled eyes, as if no one had called her beautiful in so long that she had forgotten such words existed. "You are kind to say so," she whispered. "But I feel like winter inside, cold and dead and empty." "Winter always ends," Running Wolf said softly. "Spring always returns, even to the coldest places." They talked deep into the night, sharing stories of their lost loved ones. Running Wolf told her about his brother's bravery in battle, about hunting trips with his father, about his mother's gentle songs. Walks Alone spoke of her children's laughter, her husband's strong hands, the way her family would gather around the fire on cold evenings. As they shared these memories, something remarkable happened. The pain of loss remained, but it began transforming into something richer, a celebration of love that had existed, rather than just sorrow for love that was gone. "Do you think the storm is weakening?" Walks Alone asked as dawn approached. Running Wolf listened carefully. The wind still howled, but perhaps not quite as fiercely as before. "Maybe, but I think the real storm was not in the sky." "What do you mean?" "I think it was in us, in our hearts, and maybe it needed to rage until we were ready to let it pass." She considered this, staring into the dying embers of their fire. "My grandmother would say you speak wisdom. She always said the spirits send what we need, not what we want." As pale light began filtering into the cave, they could see the canyon below was strewn with debris from the storm. But birds were beginning to sing again, and the air smelled clean and fresh. The tempest that had brought them together was finally beginning to calm. Morning light revealed the true power of the storm they had survived. The canyon floor was covered with uprooted trees, scattered boulders, and debris that must have traveled many miles on the wind. The horses stood safely in their alcove, but everything else spoke of nature's violent fury. Running Wolf and Walks Alone climbed down from their cave to assess the damage. His pack horses' scattered gifts lay buried under mud and broken branches. The carefully prepared items he had brought to win a father's approval for his son-in-law were destroyed. "I am sorry for your lost possessions," Walks Alone said, helping him dig through the debris. Running Wolf held up a silver bracelet now bent and tarnished. "They were meant for a different life than this one," he said thoughtfully. "Perhaps their loss is also a sign." They managed to salvage some dried food and his weapons, but most of his trading goods were ruined beyond repair. As they worked together to clean and organize what remained, Running Wolf found himself watching Walks Alone with growing admiration. She moved with quiet efficiency, never complaining about the difficult work or their reduced circumstances. Her hands were skilled at many tasks. She repaired his damaged saddle pack with expert stitching, and found edible roots among the storm debris that Running Wolf would have overlooked. "You are a capable woman," he observed, as she cleaned mud from his rifle. "With careful attention, a woman alone learns many skills or she does not survive long," she replied simply. They spent the day making their way back toward her destroyed camp, leading the horses carefully around fallen trees and washed out sections of the trail. The stream had returned to normal size, but its course had changed in places, carving new channels through the landscape. When they reached the site where her lodge had stood, nothing remained but scattered lodge poles and torn pieces of hide. Even the burial markers on the hill had been damaged by the storm, though they still stood as silent witnesses to her family's resting place. Walks Alone stood among the ruins without speaking for a long time. Running Wolf waited patiently, understanding that she needed to say her own farewell to this place of sorrow and memory. "I thought I would feel more pain seeing it destroyed," she said finally, "but instead I feel free, as if the storm washed away chains I did not know I was wearing." "What will you do now?" Running Wolf asked gently. She turned to face him, and he saw something different in her dark eyes. The desperate hopelessness was gone, replaced by quiet determination. "I do not know. For so long I have thought only of dying. I must learn how to think of living again." They made camp that evening on higher ground, away from the flood-damaged areas. As they sat by their small fire, sharing the simple meal they had prepared together, Running Wolf found himself thinking about the future in ways he had not considered for years. His original plan, to find a young, innocent wife who would not disturb his solitary peace, now seemed not just impossible but foolish. Walks Alone had already disturbed his peace completely, but in doing so, she had awakened parts of himself he thought were dead forever. "I was traveling south to find a wife," he said suddenly. Walks Alone looked up from the moccasin she was mending. "I thought you were a man who preferred solitude. I convinced myself I wanted a woman who would not change my quiet life. Someone young and unmarked by sorrow, who would simply share my lodge without bringing complications. And now?" she asked softly. Running Wolf stared into the fire, choosing his words carefully. "Now I think such a marriage would be like eating food with no flavor, safe but empty of any real nourishment." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The night was clear and star-filled, so different from the violent storm of the previous evening that it seemed like a different world entirely. "Would you consider traveling north with me?" Running Wolf asked suddenly. "To my people, I mean. You could make a new start among the Chiricahua. There are families who would welcome you, women who could teach you new crafts, children who need someone to tell them stories." Walks Alone set down her mending and looked at him with serious eyes. "As what, a burden for your people to carry? A woman with no family, no wealth, no skills they cannot find among their own?" "As yourself," Running Wolf said simply. "As a woman who has survived the worst that life can bring and still has strength to help others. My people have great respect for such courage." She shook her head slowly. "You are kind, but I cannot accept charity. I must find my own way to be useful in this world." Running Wolf felt a stab of disappointment, though he tried not to show it. He had begun to imagine her presence in his life, bringing her quiet strength and hard-earned wisdom to his empty lodge. "There is another way," he said carefully, afraid to speak the words that had been growing in his heart. "What way is that?" "You could come as my wife." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from their fire. Walks Alone stared at him with wide eyes, clearly shocked by his proposal. "You do not know what you are saying," she whispered. "I am not the virgin bride you sought. I am a widow marked by death and sorrow. I cannot give you children, they died with my first family. I am older, damaged, carrying grief that may never fully heal." Running Wolf leaned forward, his eyes intense in the firelight. "You are exactly what I need. Not a young woman who would require me to pretend my losses never happened, but someone who understands that love can exist alongside sorrow. Someone who knows that life is precious because it is fragile." Walks Alone's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since he had known her, they seemed to be tears of something other than pure grief. "I loved my first husband," she said softly. "That love will always be part of me." "I would not ask you to forget it," Running Wolf replied. "I loved my family too. Our old loves do not make us less able to find new love. They make us more grateful for it when it appears." She stood abruptly and walked to the edge of their firelight, her back turned to him. Running Wolf watched her struggle with emotions too complex for easy words. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "If I say yes, I bring you a heart that has been broken and mended with crooked scars. A woman who may wake crying from dreams of children who will never grow up. Someone who sees death in every fever, danger in every absence. And I bring you a man who hid from life for 3 years rather than risk being hurt again," Running Wolf said, standing to face her. "Someone who is ready to settle for a marriage without depth rather than open his heart to real love." She turned to look at him then, studying his face in the flickering light. "What kind of marriage would we have? 2 wounded people trying to heal together? The only kind worth having," Running Wolf answered. "One built on truth instead of fantasy, on understanding instead of innocence, on choice instead of mere convenience." The fire crackled between them as Walks Alone considered his words, her expression thoughtful and uncertain, as if she stood at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to leap into unknown territory or retreat to familiar ground. Walks Alone stood at the edge of their firelight for a long time, her face turned toward the star-filled sky. Running Wolf waited patiently, understanding that she was wrestling with more than just his proposal. She was deciding whether to choose life over the slow death of endless mourning. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but soft. "If I become your wife, I will not be Singing Bird Reborn. That woman died with her children. I am Walks Alone, and I will always carry scars from the path that brought me to you. I would not want you to be anyone other than who you are right now," Running Wolf replied. "Your scars are proof of your strength, not signs of weakness." She turned to face him then, and he saw decision forming in her dark eyes. "Then yes, I will come north with you as your wife, not because I have no other choice, but because I choose to try living again instead of merely surviving." The words seemed to release something in both of them.